It all started about a year ago when I moved into this new apartment on the outskirts. Everything was normal for the first few weeks. You know, the usual unpacking and getting to know the neighbors. But then, things took a turn for the bizarre. I started noticing small things at first. My mail was often misplaced or opened, and I'd find my doormat slightly moved as if someone had been standing there for a while. I brushed it off as paranoia from the new move, but then it escalated. I started receiving texts from an unknown number. They were innocuous at first, comments about the weather or asking how my day was. I figured it was a wrong number or a prank and ignored them. But then the messages became more personal, mentioning things I was doing in real time. Like, "I see you chose pizza over Chinese tonight." That freaked me out because I had just ordered pizza. I changed my number, tightened my social media privacy settings, and even got a new SIM card. But somehow, the messages continued. The stalker knew things about me that I hadn't shared with anyone, like personal thoughts I'd written in my diary, which I kept hidden in my bedroom. One night, the situation reached a peak. I was alone, watching TV when I heard a faint tapping on my living room window. I live on the 3rd floor. I froze, too scared to move, but eventually mustered the courage to look. Nothing was there. But the tapping continued intermittently throughout the night, driving me to the brink of madness. The next day, I installed cameras around my apartment and even got a security system. For a few days, everything seemed normal, and I started to relax, thinking maybe the stalker had moved on. But then, I got an email with no subject. It was from an anonymous sender, and it contained pictures. Pictures of me in my apartment taken from angles that suggested they were taken from inside the apartment. I called the police, but they said without any concrete evidence of who it was, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested it might be someone from my past, an ex or a former friend, perhaps. But I've always been a loner, and my ex and I ended on good terms. It didn't make sense. One evening when I came back from work, I found a note under my door. It was written on a piece of plain paper, but the message was chilling. "I enjoy watching you. You're never alone." I checked the cameras, but all the footage showed was the hallway with no one in sight except for me entering and leaving the apartment. I couldn't sleep at night, jumping at every little sound. My friends suggested I move, but I felt like that would be letting the stalker win. Plus, there was no guarantee they wouldn't just follow me wherever I went. It wasn't until my landlord came over to fix a leaky faucet that I got my first real break. He mentioned offhandedly that the previous tenant had been a bit of an oddball, always tinkering with electronics and whatnot. Curiosity piqued, I asked more about this person, and the landlord let slip that the guy had been evicted for illegal modifications to the apartment, including wiring and other stuff he wasn't clear on. That night, I scoured my apartment, looking for anything out of place. And there, hidden behind the living room bookshelf, was a small, almost imperceptible camera lens. I searched more and found several others hidden throughout the apartment. They were streaming live footage to somewhere. I called the police again, this time with tangible evidence. They traced the feed to a nearby location, and it led them to the previous tenant, who was living just a few blocks away. He was arrested, and it turned out he had a history of stalking and harassment. The relief I felt when they told me he was in custody was indescribable. I had spent months living in fear, thinking I was going crazy. The stalking has stopped, but the fear lingers. I'm looking into moving away, starting fresh where nobody knows me. I've also become much more cautious about my privacy and who I trust. Now I realize how important it is to listen to your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't brush it off like I did at first. And most importantly, protect your privacy at all costs. You never know who might be watching. It all began innocently enough at a local bookstore. I was browsing through the mystery section when she approached me. Her name was Sarah, and she struck up a conversation about her favorite authors, many of whom I liked too. We talked for a bit, and I left thinking nothing more of it than a pleasant interaction with a fellow book lover. A few days later, I saw her again at a cafe. She waved me over with a bright smile, and we shared coffee together. She was charming, and I'll admit, I was flattered by the attention. I gave her my number, thinking it might be nice to have a new friend in the city. That decision marked the beginning of my nightmare. The texts started the same day. At first, they were friendly and infrequent, but they quickly escalated to dozens a day. If I didn't reply immediately, Sarah would send a barrage of messages ranging from apologies for disturbing me to outright anger for ignoring her. I tried to set boundaries, explaining I was busy with work and couldn't always respond right away. But that only seemed to make things worse. She began showing up unannounced at places I frequented. The first time it happened, I thought it was a coincidence. But then it happened again and again. The coffee shop near my office, the park where I went for runs, even a friend's housewarming party. Sarah always had an excuse for being there, but the coincidence was too much to ignore. One evening, I came home to find a box outside my apartment door. Inside were gifts: a scarf, a book I mentioned wanting to read during our first meeting, and a note from Sarah expressing her feelings for me. It was clear her attachment had moved beyond normal interest or friendship. Feeling overwhelmed, I confronted her, asking her to stop contacting me and making it clear I was not interested in a relationship. She cried, apologized, and for a week the messages stopped. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. It wasn't just the gifts or the constant messages anymore. Sarah started posting pictures of me on social media, pictures I didn't even know were being taken. She wrote long posts about our supposed relationship, how we were meant to be together, and tagged me in everything. I sought legal advice and filed for a restraining order. The process was draining, both emotionally and legally. When the court date arrived, Sarah didn't show up, but the order was granted in her absence. I thought that would be enough to deter her, but the legal boundaries only seemed to provoke her more. One night, I awoke to the sound of someone trying to open my apartment door. I called the police, and they found Sarah outside, claiming she just wanted to talk. That night, she was arrested for violating the restraining order. The stalking has stopped, but the fear hasn't. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if she's found a new way to watch me. I've moved to a new apartment, changed my routines, and become much more guarded about my personal information. My experience began with a mistake. I left my phone in a cab. By the time I realized, it was too late. I did all the usual things: calling it, locking it via the Find My Phone feature, even sending messages pleading for its return. Nothing worked. I resigned myself to the loss and moved on, or so I thought. A few days later, my social media accounts started acting up. Posts I hadn't made, messages I hadn't sent. At first, I thought my friends were pranking me. But when private photos started appearing on my feed, photos that were only on my lost phone, panic set in. I changed all my passwords and hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Next came emails to my contacts, containing those photos and others, accompanied by messages I would never write. Someone was systematically trying to ruin my reputation. I was mortified. Friends called, confused and concerned, and I had no explanations, only apologies. The cyber attacks were relentless and increasingly personal. I couldn't figure out how they were still happening after all the security measures I'd taken. Then one evening, I received an email with no subject. It was from my own address to my own address. The message was chilling. Enjoying your new life? It's a shame if something were to ruin it. Check your mailbox. I rushed to the mailbox, heart pounding, fearing what I would find. Inside was a printed photo of me, taken from a distance but clearly recent. On the back, a message. Imagine what else I have. Imagine what I can do. I felt violated, hunted. The police were sympathetic, but explained the difficulty in tracking cyber harassment without clear leads. They advised me to maintain records of everything and consider hiring a cybersecurity expert. The expert was a godsend. She discovered malware on my laptop, likely installed through an email attachment. This malware had given the Stalker access to my entire digital life, even after changing my passwords. With her help, we scrubbed my devices clean, but the damage to my peace of mind was already done. Weeks passed without incident, and I started to relax, thinking maybe the Stalker had moved on. That false sense of security shattered one night when I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing seemed amiss at first glance. But as I entered my bedroom, I saw my diary open on the bed, a page ripped out and left on the pillow. I hadn't touched that diary since moving. The thought of someone sitting on my bed reading my most private thoughts was unbearable. I felt exposed, unsafe in my own home. This time, the police took immediate action. They patrolled the neighborhood, spoke to my building security, and finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they caught a break. A security camera from a nearby store captured a man using my credit card. My lost phone had my digital wallet. The man was arrested, and it turned out he was the cab driver from that fateful night. Obsessed with the life he imagined I led, he had embarked on a twisted quest to become part of it, to control it. The relief I felt at his capture was indescribable, but the scars remained. It was late autumn when I first noticed the peculiar occurrences that would soon unravel my sense of safety and plunge my world into a haunting reality. I had just landed a new job in a small town, a fresh start after a tumultuous year. The job was perfect, the town was quaint, and the people were friendly. Too friendly, it seemed, in retrospect. My first encounter was innocuous enough. A chance meeting at the local coffee shop with a man named Mike. He was polite, interested in my move, and offered some recommendations on places to see. It was a brief chat, the kind you forget by the time you finish your coffee. But Mike didn't forget. I started seeing Mike everywhere. At the grocery store, he'd be there in the next aisle. At the gym, he'd arrive shortly after I did. Even at the library, I'd find him sitting across the room, glancing over at me with a half smile. Each encounter was chalked up to small-town coincidence, until the coincidences became impossible to ignore. One evening, as I returned from work, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. It was from Mike, saying how nice it was to run into me all the time and suggesting we should hang out. The note was unsettling, not just in its content, but in the realization that he knew where I worked. I decided to confront Mike, politely declining his invitation and asking him to respect my privacy. He seemed taken aback, apologizing profusely, claiming he meant no harm. I wanted to believe him. After all, hadn't I moved here looking for a community? But then, the calls started. My phone would ring at all hours, with silence on the other end or the faint sound of breathing before the line went dead. My social media was bombarded with friend requests from accounts that had no connections other than Mike. The turning point came one night when I was home alone. It was past midnight, and I was jolted awake by the sound of my backyard gate slamming shut. Heart pounding, I peered out the window but saw nothing in the darkness. The next morning, I found footprints in the dew on my lawn, leading up to my back door and then away into the night. I filed a report with the local police, but without tangible evidence, they could do little more than offer reassurance. I installed security cameras, bought pepper spray, and changed my daily routines. Yet, the feeling of being watched never dissipated. One evening, while reviewing footage from my security cameras, I caught a glimpse of a figure lurking at the edge of my property. It was Mike, standing just beyond the reach of the lights, staring towards the house. The police were called again, and this time, they took action. Mike was questioned and eventually confessed to an obsession he couldn't control. He had followed me, documented my routines, and even collected items from my trash. The reality of the situation was chilling. I had been stalked with such intensity that my entire life had been under surveillance. The ordeal ended with Mike receiving a restraining order and undergoing mandatory psychological evaluation. I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered sense of security. The friendly faces of the town now seemed menacing, every stranger a potential threat. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.